Hello and welcome to this session today. My name's Ashley. I'll be hosting this session and the topic is managing mental health in the workplace. Now today's session is loosely based around Unit 533 in the Level 5 qualification, although it crosses over and the subject, can be linked to many practices within leadership and management. So an important topic and one that I'm going to take my time with, and hopefully, even if you're not picking a unit associated with mental health, you'll be able to pick up one or two things that might be able to help you leading or managing or tackling any issues surrounding mental health within your workplace or within your team. So the aim of this session is to provide you with the basic, knowledge and understanding to manage mental health issues in the workplace. Now, we're not psychologists, we're not psychiatrists, we're not doctors. So we're not presumed to know everything there is to know about mental health. But leaders should aim to demonstrate visible and proactive action to build a diverse and inclusive culture, that supports mental health and friendly, a mental health friendly workplace, basically. So let's get started. I want to start, as I usually do, by just pointing you in the direction of when you do start any unit to look at your unit specification and the indicative content and everything that's included in there, because that will help you to write your assignments and understand the areas of research that you need to look into. I'm going to start with just defining a couple of things. So the World Health Organization states that health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. They also go on to say that an important implication of this definition is that mental health is more than just the absence of mental disorders and disabilities. And just try and bear that in mind throughout this presentation. So often, people will call mental health emotional health or well-being or, caring for the mind. And it's just as important in my eyes, in the eyes of the World Health Organization. It's just as important as physical health. They go hand in hand, really. So mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her abilities and can cope with the normal stresses and worries of life. They can work productively and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Now, I'm stating this word for word because I think it's important to be able to consider what the World Health Organization defines, mental health as a clear point within their definition is that being mentally healthy does not mean that you don't have a mental health problem. And what they mean by that is, somebody might have a mental illness, such as, bipolar, for example, and can manage it well with, medication or their own coping mechanisms or strategies. And that might be, they might be mentally healthy, but they could still have an underlying health issue. So it's important to consider that as well throughout this presentation and, every day, really. So what is the UK legal provision on mental health? And, there has been some updates recently. So it might be worth going on gov.uk and having a look at that, because it might affect your policies that you have in place. For example, remote working, and there's been additions, and there's always been additions and amendments to any sort of act. So it's worth having a little look just to see whether they impact on your written policies. So in the UK, disability discrimination provisions in the Equality Act 2010 encompass a range of mental health illnesses which can legally be classed as a disability. basically a range of conditions might qualify a person for protection under the Act, providing there's substantial and long-term effects. So that's usually for at least a year on their ability to carry out their normal day-to-day tasks. So mental impairments do not need to be clinically well recognised to qualify as a disability either. So it's important to remember that. So discrimination against those with mental health issues, it remains widespread across industries, across all organisations. Even though a significant proportion of the workforce will face poor mental health during the working life. So it's just one or two facts just to provide you with here. Based on the World Economic Forum's report, global mental illness, they basically estimate that health is estimated to cost, so mental health is estimated to cost 2.5 trillion a year in lost productivity. So consider that as a it's really huge amount of money. So it's worth considering putting things in place to help people, because at the end of the day, mental health, it's prevention is better than cure, and being able to prevent or stop mental health from escalating within your organization is best practice as well. Another fact for you: stress related sickness absences costs an estimated 4 billion annually. So lost employment, so people losing their employment, which obviously so relevant in the last couple of years, that contributes to 37% of the total cost of mental health in England. So people losing their jobs and becoming, mentally unhealthy due to that, it's costing a lot of money to the economy. So therefore, it's important for organisations and the government to invest in practices that will help and maintain a good mentally healthy workforce. So if an employee has a disability, the organisation has a duty of care to make reasonable adjustments to accommodate their needs. So this includes those with a mental health condition, even if it's not being classed as a disability within the definition of the Equality Act. It's still good practice for an employer to make appropriate changes to their work pattern or to the way that they support their employment. So it's important here to seek advice if you need it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about approaching people that you believe might have a mental illness in the following slides. But it's important to remember here now that if you are unsure, seek advice from expert organisations. There's employee assistance programs, there's charities that can help, and there's organisations that can actually help you to learn more, to be able to clearly communicate how you can adjust a person's employment. That might just be something as simple as, if people are struggling with the work-life balance, it might be a bit of flexible work and might be able to help them, and that might just be a small strategy that you can put in place to help them be able to get the mental health back on an even keel. So let's talk about now individual stresses, and I'm going to point out, because today is actually 2 years to the day of the first ever lockdown that we had. So I am going to relate this session a little bit to that, because there has been a huge rise in mental health conditions. It might even mean that people are just more happy to approach the subject now than he was, 2 years ago, because, it is becoming a little bit more acceptable. And, it's about leaders being able to adapt and adopt a growth mindset and lean into skills such as empathy, flexibility, and the ability to listen without judgment. Not only will these skills help an individuals, the individuals that they're leading, they'll help us to become better leaders and managers as well. But let's consider, the impact of, say, COVID, or, even Brexit for some organisations, or it might even be that, your company has struggled so much throughout COVID because maybe you work in hospitality and, you've had to close down your organisation for a couple of months during lockdown, and maybe your company hasn't been earning much money. So, I mean, every organisation will think of a crisis as, well, even every individual will think of a crisis in different ways. But let's look at what the individual stresses are. So, one of the main things, and we can all associate with COVID, is, the quantity and the frequency of information that we're getting. Now, I don't know about you, but with me, I found that I was watching the news a lot, and it was really, really, taking over my life, really, and trying to keep up to date with what was the real news and what wasn't real news, and what was just, what was rumours, and that information. And today, information is so accessible, via the internet, via your phone, via, your computer in work, the news at home, word of mouth, even when they have WhatsApp messages and people passing videos and information on. It's you've got so much access to information, and it can be overwhelming, as well as, maybe not having access to information, and the unknown as well can also be a major stressor to an individual and to an organisation as well. Frustration and boredom can also, cause you to overthink. Concern for people within your workplace or vulnerable family members. Financial worries, which is obviously a really big one, because, it can build and build and build, and people can get themselves in debt as well, and people can be scared to talk about financial worries or problems that they're having as well. And, thinking about the pandemic, a lot of people were put on furlough, and it was just accepted that people should deal with the reduced income. But a lot of people really struggled with it. I mean, I was one of the lucky ones that could, work from home. But a lot of my family members really struggled with being put on furlough and not knowing when they were going back to work. Inadequate supplies could be one of them. If you are working from home, do you actually have all the access to the resources that you need? And having a sense of isolation with the rest of the world. Again, some people were lucky enough to have the family around them, but some people lived on their own as well. So, and that could be the case even when you're not thinking about COVID. Some people are isolated by their own thoughts in work and at home as well. The loss of the usual routine and fear of personal safety and health. We can consider, if you look back at some of the last sessions that I've done, maybe the motivation example, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, points out that as human beings, we need to be free from threats to our physical and psychological well-being before we can, reach the higher needs within, the triangle. If you recognise the model as a triangle, so before a team can start performing, the basic needs need to be met. So if your basic needs are not being met and you're scared for your safety or your health, then it can be hard to be motivated to push yourself and to actually work normally and work your way up to the hierarchy of needs to be able to be motivated and reach that self-actualization. But also loss of social and physical contact with others as well. So that social connection, people need that. Human beings need that to be able to function. And with more and more people home working, it's fine. It's not just finding somewhere to plug your laptop in. It's critical that leaders and employers consider the health and safety obligations, their duty of care to people, whether they're working from home or whether they're working in the office. And that's, to be able to provide them with the duty of care to help with the mental and emotional well-being as well. So, some people may have found, and I've found through listening to some of my learners or, reading their assignments, that the people that are working remotely are not having regular one-to-ones, they're not having regular appraisals, and they're not feeling as connected to, the line manager, which can obviously slip into people not feeling valued, or they might feel isolated, or they might have a fear for the job. And that can obviously be a really big stressor, which can bring on mental health. So it's important to be aware of these individual stresses, but also as a leader, as a manager, I don't know what level management that you're actually working on now, but it's important to be able to consider that employer stresses based on, like a major crisis such as the pandemic. So they might need to rewrite the policies and procedures for remote working, or they might need to rewrite the policies and procedures relating to health and safety in the workplace. For example, like the sick policy, the absent policy. What's the policy if somebody had COVID, or do they need to have a temperature monitor? Do they need to write risk assessments? It's also important to consider how they're going to, work around people having that time off, and what if people refuse to return back to work? What's going to be the process for that as well? Also considering how they can assess or monitor or review the work that's being done at home, and ensuring all the time, the employer needs to ensure that the customers' needs are being met, that the customers, that sales are still going through efficiently and effectively, and because they have targets to meet. They've got goals they need to accomplish. They've got a vision for the organisation that they still need to be moving towards. So although, mental health and employees' health as a whole needs to be considered, that, it's always a real big pressure and stress for an employer to meet the financial targets, meet the organisational goals, and to follow the strategy through in order to, walk towards that vision and, and the goal of the organisation. So it might be worth looking at, getting the team together and, really thinking about how you can implement the policies and procedures, or inform how they've been reviewed to meet the needs of the employees, but to also, ensure and redirect and inform of the stresses that you've had throughout the pandemic, or throughout any crisis such as Brexit, that has obviously had a big impact on organisations. Being honest, transparent, and communicating with the workforce, it's obviously key here. So I thought it would be important just to think of mental health, and there's many types of mental health issues or problems, and it can be brought upon, suddenly because of a specific event in someone's life, or it can build up gradually over time, or research has even shown, that mental health issues can be hereditary as well. But I want to just talk about the effects of trauma. So I'm just going to emphasize what I mean by trauma, a traumatic event. So, considering that, mental health can be brought upon by a traumatic event, it can be that a person's exposed to death, or threatened by death or violence, or injury, or, you know, a major individual change in a person's life. You know, people can be affected by the trauma of coming back to work after being on maternity for a year, and the huge change to that person's schedule could cause them trauma when moving back in. So, that could be seen as a traumatic event as well. But there's a couple of ways that people react to, and the effects of a traumatic event on an individual. And I thought it was important just to point them out, because obviously following that, you might start seeing signs of mental health building up. And, prevention is better than cure. So being able to support your staff when you're looking at the effects of trauma, I think, is quite important. So intrusions are about when people have been in a traumatic event. It could be, a car accident, for example. They might re-experience that trauma. So maybe if it was on the way to work one day, every time that they come into work, say, an example could be, if it was in like the tunnel or something, for example, and there was an accident in there, whether they were involved in it or not, they might be re-experiencing that trauma every day, and, coming into the office, and that could cause them emotional distress. They might have flashbacks. So every day when they're starting the day, that the effects of that trauma could be impacting on their mental health throughout that day, every day. So, it's important to try and consider and be empathetic towards people who are being involved in some form of traumatic event. Some people might not want to talk about it. So, an example could be that, throughout the pandemic, you talk to numerous people about how it has affected them. And some people would point blank say, I don't want to talk about it, just want to move on. And that person may have had, a really, really bad effect from it, people dying in the family, or, it might be that they completely lost the job or had to close down the company, and they just want to move on, and they don't want any sort of external reminders of the traumatic event. Then you've got negative alterations in the mood, so basically negative impacts on the mood, and people, can become angry with this sort of effect. So they could also have just decreased interest in the day-to-day activities. They might feel alone. They might feel like they can't talk to people. They might feel that they're, blaming a lot of people for what's happened, and they might even have they might forget, like blank out part of what's happened in that traumatic event. They might not even be able to recall features of or key moments in what happens within that traumatic event. So it's important to remember as a leader to bear all this in mind, to be able to support staff. And, lastly, another effect of trauma could be the alterations in arousal or reactivity. So some people may be hypervigilant, so they're always considering what they're going to do if something like this was to happen again. I know a person who's like that now. They keep thinking that there's going to be another lockdown because there's an increase in COVID cases at the moment, and they're thinking, well, what can I do? Because last time it was really awful for her and her family. So she's already thinking of being hypervigilant to think, well, what am I going to do just in case? Some people may have, lost the routine of sleeping. I know a couple of people that were, working late at night and then sleeping for the day, and it completely impacted on their mental health. Aggressions or irritability, destructive behaviour, problems with concentrating for long periods of time, heightened startled response. So there's a number of different things that you can see from this effect, and it's important to be aware of them. If people are being sharp and snapping, it could be because that traumatic event has impacted on them that much, that it's caused them to be irritable, or it's caused them to have a heightened response to certain situations. So bearing all that in mind, and I have put angry or sad and in a really sad place here, just to point out that looking at people's facial expressions, the way that they move, even the tone of voice, and considering all of these signs as well as a leader, as a manager, it's a way to be able to support your staff. And the more and more that we, that we show that we support them, the better. Today's organisations operate in an environment which is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. ILM point out that that's a VUCA environment, business environment, and it's characterised by increasing globalisation, technology, disruption, shrinking time zones. There's a number of things that make organisations VUCA, or volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And the traumatic events that we've had recently and that have impacted on our economy, and all of us as individuals, makes that environment even more VUCA. So it's important to be able to, as a leader and a manager, to be able to focus on your staff and be able to support them throughout these times. So obviously this isn't all conditions that affect mental well-being, and the terms mental health disorder or mental illness can apply to a wide variety of conditions, but I've pointed out some here just for people to be aware of. Anxiety is, people might often think that people that are introverts might have anxiety problems, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. So it's important to air that out and just asking sometimes, are you okay, to people, or are you comfortable doing this? If, for example, you're going to ask them to do a presentation, that's also important as well. So consider, you can put labels on things, but it's probably best not to, unless people have been diagnosed. But these are some conditions that can affect mental health, mental well-being. But remembering that, stress is probably the biggest, instigator of a mentally unhealthy workforce, and making sure that stress is balanced, and some healthy stress, for example, a monthly target that needs to be hit. So some people getting a little bit stressed trying to push towards that that's normal, but it's considering what that guideline is, what that line is. So how can we recognize the signs? And it's important that, here's just some ideas on how to recognize signs and symptoms, but this is not exclusively associated with a mental health problem. So it might be worth recognizing that. Don't jump to conclusions. If people are withdrawn from the job, they might just not like the job anymore. It might not be challenging them no more. They might be looking for a job elsewhere. So it's not, don't jump to conclusions that, these are just signs for mental health problems. It's important to consider if people, have lack of concentration, are demotivated, timekeeping is becoming a problem, they're underperforming regularly, they have a heightened emotional state, they're coming in upset or crying, or, whatever. It's important to be able to obviously be aware of it, but consider it might just be an underlying problem with the actual job that they're doing as well. So consider that. So what can we do as, managers, as leaders? What can we do for our staff? We can firstly, think about, walking the walk, and, living our life as best that we can, and letting the staff know, well, this is how we deal with this situation, or this is how we have our coping mechanisms for dealing with stressful situations in work, or just also notifying and letting them know that mental health and physical health are inextricably linked and connected, and looking after your physical well-being, and doing some exercise or some mindfulness can also help you to show your staff how you're going on about managing your mental health. So consider what you're doing first. I used to have a manager that, just normal targets and quality situations, they used to get really stressed and worked up about it. And I could just see it having a knock-on effect with the rest of the team. So it'd be like, oh, we have to do this, we have to do this. And they'd often leave things to last minute. And, and then the whole team would become really stressed out with the actual situation that was actually a regular thing that happens every 6 months. So it's prevention better than cure, as I say, forward thinking, planning, so your team don't become stressed, and also creating just creating a culture of a positive working culture of open communication, where people feel comfortable to talk, that people feel comfortable to share their feelings. If someone says, I'm feeling really stressed because you're feeling really stressed, and you're making me really worry about what's happening. Having that open communication can a shared problem is halved, as some people say. I think that's the saying anyway. It goes something like that. But we have an opportunity, with our staff, to show that we've got a supportive culture, that we've got a positive culture within the organisation. It's important to be able to communicate that to them so they feel comfortable opening up as well. Again, communicate. And I've noted down here, being comfortable to have uncomfortable conversations. Now, I know that sounds a bit strange, but even as a leader, as a manager, we find it difficult some people find it difficult to approach certain people or certain situations. And, it's not easy. It's not easy to approach people and have a conversation which you really don't want to have. But sometimes having that can really help to basically, break down them barriers. And I'm making sure that your staff know that they can have regular breaks if they're feeling a little bit stressed or upset, or, if they're going through some bad times. Also allowing and making sure that they've got resources in place to know where their policies are or the procedures are if they are having a bad time, and making sure that all of the staff know that you have a duty of care to them, to make sure that that they're okay, and that they can work in a happy environment. And lastly, making sure that you have a humanist approach. It's something that you can really do is saying, I'm a person, I understand, having that empathetic approach as well to your staff is, it's essential in leadership, and it's needed at the moment. So one of the learning outcomes asks you to look at your policies, procedures, and support strategies. And if you haven't got a mental health policy, then you might need to adopt one. You might need to speak to senior management about putting one in place, and planning to put that policy in place so people are aware. I mean, most organisations today, will have a mental health policy, in accordance with, HSE standards as well. But it's important to be able to know where it is, be able to point your team in the direction of it, and, provide education and training into where that can be found. Or you might need to provide education and training to your team leaders so they know what to do to support the team. Also, carrying out mental health audits are really good. Just sending a survey out, just asking a couple of questions, just to see where everybody is. If everyone comes back and they're having problems, that there's probably a work-life balance problem that you might need to work out. promoting physical well-being is a good strategy as well. And I found that in a workplace that I was in a couple of years ago, they used to do challenges every year. So, for charity, and that would be like, walking up, like we walked up a scaffold hike one year. We did a challenge that was how many people can get can do this many steps a day, and it promoted people just to get up and walk around a little bit as well. And also to remember to improve your working conditions where and when you can. So again, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so making sure that physical and psychological well-being is being looked after in order to be able to motivate staff further and further. So another a way of, so if someone comes over to you and they're informing you that they have got a mental health problem, whether that's a recognized one by medical experts, or whether they just feel like they're really stressed or becoming depressed, or whatever, really. Wise Minds is an acronym, well, accepts is the acronym for distracting people and allowing them to think of ways to understand and accept that sometimes some of the issues that are solving the problems are out of their control, or some sort of coping mechanisms. So activities is about thinking about, it might not even be exercise, but engaging in exercise or other activities that might be bringing them away from the stressful situations. Contributing is about being able to help somebody else with something else that can make you feel good about being able to help that person. So it might be doing something for charity, or it might be doing a small project outside of work that helps with school football team, for example. Just making them feel good and taking the mind away from the stressful situation. Comparison. So some people say that comparing yourself to others is a bad thing, but also one of the things that I always say in my own mind when I feel like I'm having a bad time is there's always people worse off in the world than me. And, it's true that there's probably people less fortunate or are dealing with more stressful situations than you are. So sometimes it can help you to form a bit of a gauge as to how bad your situation is based on others' emotions. So do some activities that can stimulate other emotions. So an example could be in lockdown, when things were getting a little bit on top, I found through Facebook that there was a live salsa dancing free class, and I just decided to do that one evening, just to take my mind off, the housework, the kids' work, my work, every bit of work. So sometimes maybe finding a new hobby and thinking of another way to stimulate a different emotion can be good for you. And pushing away, so like leaving the situation mentally for a while. So if, for example, you know that this certain situation is really bothering you, move away from it, or take your mind somewhere else, concentrate on something else for a couple of hours, and then bring yourself back to it once you know that your mind is a little bit more free of thought and free of stress from that situation. And then thoughts, so focus. Yeah, to focus your attention somewhere else and think to yourself, is this a situation that is in your control or that's out of your control? So if it's a situation that is completely out of your control, then you need to start thinking of, well, how can I accept this situation and move away from this situation to be able to deal with that stress and understand that there's nothing really I can do about it at that point. So moving your thought process and compartmentalizing, well, what can you do about it? And if there isn't much you can do about it, how are you going to be able to deal with that? And then find a mechanism to deal with that. And using this accepts acronym can also help to do that. And temptations, which could be, squeezing a ball, or pressure on hands. So you might, some people say that this can help to reduce pressure or take your mind off things. Some people say that this can help. There's a number of different sensations that people say that having having Reiki or something can help with stress. So there's a number of different ways, but that just sort of I'm trying to explain how, one of the methods that can be used. Another thing that we can also consider as managers is management standards. This is common in some large organisations, and it's set by HSE. So HSE's management standards represent a set of conditions that, if present, demonstrate good practice through a step-by-step risk assessment approach. So you can allow for assessment of a current situation using pre-existing data, so it could be surveys and other techniques to then go on to promote active discussion and working in partnership with the employees and representatives to help decide like practical improvements that can be made. So the acronym, I mean, the points to point out here is demands, support, role, control, relationships, and change. And you know, the practical improvements through adopting a management standard approach could be that it could help simplify risks by identifying the main risk factors, help employers focus on the underlying causes and their prevention, providing like a yardstick by which organisations can gauge their performance in tackling key areas such as mental health. And you know, the 6 areas that they cover are designed, well, they could be you know, linked in with policies, and they, you know, they are associated with poor health, lower productivity, increased accidents and sickness, absence rates. But in order to effectively implement the management standards approach, it's essential that you ensure that the resource, support, and infrastructure for the standards to be effectively implemented are in place within the organisation. So demands, it includes issues such as workloads, work patterns, work environments, bearing in mind that, you know, people have come back maybe a year or two back to the office, maybe 1 day a week, maybe the work patterns have changed, maybe that they're completely working from home, maybe they work from home 1 day a week, you know, and it's important to be able to link, you know, the demands with new policies, or an adaptation of your policies or a review of your policies in order to be able to support the people within the work, and always remembering your role. So whether people understand their role or your role could have changed, or it might just be the communication channels between a team may have changed as well. And yeah, considering the control, the relationships, and the change that can impact on people's mental health as well. So there is obviously negative impacts for an organisation of, and I've just spoke to you about, you know, the global mental illness estimation and the cost on the global economy. But you know, the negative impact on people is, you know, it's clear to see. Decline in performance, they can be disconnected from others, they can really become isolated. You might even be able to see that there's a deterioration in the appearance and the way that they look, like they're not really looking after themselves, increased pessimism. So, you know, everything that they say could be negative. And, you know, I've seen that with a close friend. Every single everything that we talk about can be turned around into a negative way. And there's one of the points that I made to her when she, you know, finally went to the doctor and found out that she was diagnosed with depression, that, you know, it can often be a case that everything becomes negative and glass half empty sort of situation, and lack of confidence and motivation to just do daily normal tasks. And these are, you know, these are things that you should be keeping an eye out for with your team. So open communication, I've said it once, I can say it about every single topic that I talk about when I'm talking about any sort of leadership and management subject, that open communication is key to, you know, prevention, and key to support. But remembering to be self-aware. So if you're always saying, my door's always open, I'm here to support you, I'm happy to talk about how I'm feeling, you can talk to me whenever. So demonstrate how coming together can be positive for every single person. And it's okay. It's all right to say when you're not having a good time. You might say, I'm having a really bad time at the moment with this, that, and the other, but this is what I can do to make it better. This is my plan of action to make the end of the week better than the start of the week. And as a whole, if you're high level within the organisation, it might be important to review organisational visions and values and be able to do a little bit of a presentation on a team meeting with the team to be able to say, right, things have changed slightly with our organisation and the direction it's moving in, or things have changed within the way that we're operating because we're wanting more of a work-life balance, or the vision of the organisation has changed because the environment has changed in the industry in which we're working in. So it's worth always having a little look and reviewing your organisational vision and goals, communicating any sort of changes to the team. Reviewing your strategic plans. A lot of things have changed in relation to technology and the adaptation of the way that we work. So, it might be worth reviewing strategic plans and communicating why and how you're going to be maybe making smaller adaptations or changes. Also, confirming employees' roles with the leadership team, but maybe having one-to-ones a little bit more regularly. If you think that there's been any sort of impacts on people's mental health within the workplace, and also clarifying and always making the team understand that you're aware that you need a healthy workforce in order to be able to operate to the best efficiency, and you're happy to be able to provide support and any sort of different ways of working in order to be able to meet that need, so you can still have an efficient and effective workforce. And then obviously communicating your commitment to have for employees' health and safety within the workplace. Again, moving back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, basic needs need to be met by employees, and that's basically the duty of care as an employer. Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you go about approaching, a member of staff that you believe that may be suffering with a mental illness and hasn't approached you about it. Now, this can be one of the most difficult things to do as a manager, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in this. Say doctors might do it a completely different way, but in my experience and from my research, obviously it's important to be able to find an area with no interruptions, an office that might be that, that you're not going to have the someone knock on the door every 5 minutes. It might even be that you ask someone to come for a coffee with you outside of the office to avoid any interruptions. Ask simple open questions to the person. So it might be that you have found out through somebody else that you think that people are showing signs of having a mental illness, and you might want to listen to the employee, but ask their thoughts on what has been said. Say, this is my thought process, this is why I'm asking you to this meeting. You've shown signs of low performance, that you've been coming in late a lot, that you've been looking a little bit stressed out within your day-to-day work, and would show genuine concern and support, respecting them throughout. That respect is really important, and listening actively. Now, a lot of people think that listening actively is just listening, but listening actively is really taking time to, use your facial expressions, your body language to inform that you are listening to them. Use reflective listening and say, it sounds like you're saying this. This is what I'm hearing. Am I right in saying this? Clarify what they're saying, to be sure that you are fully understanding what they're saying, and be sure not to make any sort of judgments or be patronizing in any way, or say, just listen to what they're saying. So you might say, so you feel like this, let me know if this is right and how I'm hearing this. And focus on the person and not the problem. So you might know that the signs are that they're underperforming. The signs are that there's a big, there's there's a big target that needs to be hit by the end of the month. That's not the problem. It's the signs and symptoms and the root cause, and it's focusing on them as an individual as well. And then make sure that you are following up and summarizing. Now there might be a bottom line to this meeting. It might be that you've been continually underperforming for months, and there might be a bottom line that you need to get across to them. It might be that if it continues going this way, then senior management will want us to put you through the disciplinary process. But I don't want that. But what I would like to do is consider any sort of actionable objectives that we can put in place that can help you. And that might be making reasonable adjustments, as we said earlier on, to be able to help with their work-life balance, for example. It might be that you need to put together an action plan to give them short, realistic actions that they can meet, so they don't feel like that they're too overwhelmed. It might be that you sit with them every day and do a to-do list to be able to work through. It may be that you want to just say to them, well, maybe we'll meet up once a week and we can go through what you're doing at home and at work to be able to help you to move forward with this. And then, not just for the individual that you're talking to, but being sure that you are promoting a positive, mentally healthy workforce by, maybe you might want to consider as part of your policy or, a new strategy to put up some mental health awareness posters so people are looking at them regularly, so they can consider, well, am I actually suffering here? Because some people can become in denial and spiral out of control with their illness because they don't talk about it. Again, surveys, regular one-to-ones. There's a lot of videos out there that you can have short, like 20-minute, workshops that you just show them a video and have a little talk about it. So it opens up a discussion on mental health, and people can then talk about it more freely, and then people feel more comfortable talking about their feelings more freely. You might say, well, how did you feel about that video? Has anything like that ever happened to you before? And it, opens up discussions within the workplace. Identifying champions of mental health. Now, I know a couple of organisations, I know Verdi do this because my cousin was talking about it not long ago, that they basically asked people if anyone wants to become a champion of mental health, and they got to go on additional training courses. And then usually the person who she said was a champion in the past is usually somebody who's got really good interpersonal skills and really good at talking to all different levels within the organisation, so that person can become approachable. Because sometimes, speaking to your line manager about being stressed when it can be hard to talk to, or a senior manager. Sometimes it can be hard to talk to them if you've got a problem in work, never mind if you've got a mental health problem. So it's worth thinking about, asking somebody who's like neutral within the organisation or in a middle ground to be able to go on a few courses to be able to help with that, or offer everybody a mental health training in some ways, promote policies or any support strategies that are available. And as I mentioned about challenges as well that you can actually go ahead and do. Now, you're not alone in supporting your staff with their mental health. You're not alone if you've got mental health as a leader and a manager, and it's important to be able to consider that you've got all of these people and more. Gov.uk have got a range of resources and a range of support systems as well. You've got charities such as Minds and the Wellbeing Helpline, and there's loads of resources on there. The British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, which are always there to support employers as well. But remember, leaders and managers should not be expected to be experts in their mental health, just being able to support your staff and them knowing that you can support them is really important. And yeah, just making sure that you've got that open communication. So just to end this session, to effectively implement and adopt a policy surrounding mental health is really important, or adapting a policy following the crazy times that we've had over the last 2 years, and that we're still having now. Scale and optimize and scale up and promote mental health education. I can't stress that enough. It is important. Collect and analyze a variety of data from your staff, whether that be surveys or whether that be looking at the performance management over the last 2 years, or systems or KPIs or whatever, just to be able to see if it's impacted on them, and making sure that your one-to-ones are a little bit more regular while we're coming out of this COVID crisis. But in relation to the assignment itself, so Unit 533 specifically, it asks you to reflect on your own organisation's current approach towards mental health. Now, if there isn't a policy that's written, that there isn't clear strategies, then you might want to speak to your manager or your CEO about why there isn't, and if not, is there any sort of mental health process that's linked to the Health and Safety or the Equality Act or policy within the workplace? Assessing 2 other organisations' mental health strategy as well. Now, obviously, an assessment needs some form of evidence. So when you are completing an assessment, it's important to be able to add some form of appendix to the end of your assignment to prove that some form of assessment has been done. And that might be asking another organisation or someone another organisation just to complete a survey, or it might be that you look at their website. Now, I've attached a link at the bottom of the resource section on Moodle that's just got, I think it's got 20 of the best organisations with the best mental health strategies. Johnson & Johnson was one of them. And I've wrote a couple of notes that, they lead the change in creating new treatments and initiatives for their staff. Employees are the heart, mind and soul of Johnson & Johnson, and they're committed to keeping them healthy. So these are points that they point out, but they have got probably about 8 different strategies and processes that they have to ensure that they have a healthy workforce. So that's one in particular. But there's a couple that you can choose from and review. You've got to develop a plan to meet requests for reasonable adjustments of somebody who's suffering mental health issues within the workplace, and then describe approaches to improve mental health in your organisations, to consider different strategies, and you can link that to other organisations, and then provide evidence that positive mental health is being promoted. So that might be that you provide leaflets or examples or evidence of emails that's being sent out for training opportunities, for example, and then to provide evidence of communication with 2 people regarding mental health and support mechanisms that are in place within the organisation. Now, this might not be as easy for you to do because of confidentiality, so it's important to be able to get their approval before you do share that information. But it might just be that you've just got notes from a past one-to-one where you've discussed mental health and support mechanisms, or a meeting that you've had, or a workshop that you've had, or training that's led to you speaking to 1 or 2 people about the mental health support mechanisms in place within the workplace. And then the last point is to assess your mental health. So again, an assessment needs some form of evidence, and there are 1 or 2 self-assessments within the information pack and within the resource section on Moodle for you to look at. So yeah, Unit 533, a lot more people have been choosing it this year, and relatively so. But if you need help, if you need any support, if you want to contact me to talk about it a little bit further, then you can just contact me via my email. I hope that this session has been of some use to you, whether completing Unit 533 or any units covering mental health or stress or conflict management within the workplace. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this session. Thanks for taking part today or watching on records.